Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue number 105, WandaVision, an episode about not the TV show, but the relationship between Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, and the Vision, to tie in synergistically with WandaVision, the TV show, premiering later this week on Disney+. So, because we are not nothing if corporate whores.
Okay. I was going to say
opportunistic.
Yeah, timely.
Send us money, Disney. No, God knows they can afford it. Before we get started, I know when we did the episode that came out last week, Maxwell Lord, we indicated that we had recorded it prior to watching Wonder Woman 1984, just as we are recording this episode prior to seeing WandaVision. That still doesn't come out for another 2 weeks as of when we're recording this, because we're trying to get better at filling a backlog. I've seen Wonder Woman 1984. And I know I said in the Maxwell Lord episode, I've read a lot of early things. It says it's going to be great. Not so much. And I got into a debate with Ariel on Twitter because she was like, I loved it. And I was like, I respect your take. I disagree with it. And she's like, do you not love the movie, sir? And I was like, no, not that.
And I'm so thankful that you were able to say it that way, because I have not had the pleasure of actually watching it yet. And from what I've read so far, I'm not in a rush to watch it, which is way different than my attitude prior to reading anything about it.
As was mine. I loved the first movie. This one, I was disappointed. I will just leave it at that. I'm not telling anybody else how to feel. I am not going to tell you you are wrong for liking it. I have matured beyond that. At least I hope I have. But it was not for me. And I will just say that had I been given the Dreamstone, my wish would be for those 2.5 hours of my life back. I will just say that. We'll see whether or not I want to alter reality to wipe WandaVision from my brain after it's done, but we shall see. So, with all of that being said, this is our second relationship episode. The first one was on the relationship between Magneto and Charles Xavier. And Magneto is or isn't Wanda's father. As I said to Doc when we were prepping for this episode, this is the most why because comics episode we have ever done. None of this shit makes sense. None of it. I am going to say things to you. I am going to describe characters and actions in this episode that are not going to make one micron of sense. But it's comics. So here we are. So let's strap in and get ready. Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in The X-Men #4, March 1964. The Vision, created by Roy Thomas, Stan Lee, and John Buscema in Avengers #57, October 1968. So it's important to note that both Wanda and Vision were villains who were originally opposed to the Avengers before joining their ranks. Now, Wanda We could do an entire episode just on Wanda and her backstory. No. I need to say this. I need to get this out because it's so integral to her characterization. But people, be grateful. I'm summarizing this for you as best I can. I promise you that. So Wanda and Quicksilver, whom we've already discussed, Pietro, are twins, born of Magda, the wife of Magneto. Originally, they believed they were the children of Robert Frank, the Whizzer, who does not have peeing as a superpower, but was one of the original Timely Comics heroes. He was the Whizzer because he could run really fast, because that was how they came up with names in 1939 or whenever. So they believed they were the children of the Whizzer. And then in the Vision and Scarlet Witch miniseries years later, it's revealed they weren't actually Robert Frank's children, nor were they the children of Django Maximoff, who they also believed was at least their adoptive father. No. They were birthed to Magda, who was fleeing her husband Magnus after seeing his magnetic powers. And so they were raised by Bova, a half-cow woman genetically enhanced by the High Evolutionary. Because comics, people. So the whole thing with the Whizzer and Django Maximoff wasn't real. And then we also later find out in the Axis storyline that she and Pietro aren't actually Magneto's kids either. And the reason for that is because that storyline, comics-wise, came in the middle of the pissing match between Marvel Studios and 20th Century Fox over ownership to the mutant characters. And so Marvel, in a massive move of pettiness, said, well, we're going to make Wanda and Quicksilver not mutants. And then this way we can do whatever we want with them and just sort of destroy any credibility that they had as being half, or mutants with the, being Magneto's kids. And the ultimate move of pettiness, wiping away 30 plus years of canon establishment. So I don't know who the hell Wanda and Pietro's parents are at this point. I never read Axis. I read the first issue and the entire conceit of it bored me. So, and it was in the midst of one of those like Marvel, hey, we're going to throw out one of those big reality changing crossover events every 6 months. And I just got fatigued and I didn't care about it. So I don't know who Wanda and Pietro's real parents are at this point, and I don't really care. So that's one half of this incredibly messed up relationship. The other half, the Vision. Let's talk about him for a second now. So Vision has the body of the original Human Torch, Jim Hammond, because for those of you that know the Human Torch through the Fantastic Four, Johnny Storm is actually the second character with the Human Torch name. Jim Hammond was a synthezoid, I think was the term that he used.
Yep.
And when his skin reacted to oxygen, he burst into flames. So basically he was on fire all the time. So Ultron 5, who was created, as we all know, by Hank Pym. Go back and listen to the Hank Pym episode. Ultron decided, I'm going to create more robots to help destroy my father, Hank Pym. So he gets a hold of the original Human Torch body, and now he incorporates the brain patterns of Simon Williams, a.k.a. Wonder Man, who we haven't done yet. We'll get around to Simon one of these days.
Oh, yes.
Simon's a very fascinating character. Underrated, I think. So we later learn, so that's fairly straightforward. He's got the body of the Human Torch with brain patterns of Wonder Man. And he's also built by Ultron. So Ultron is his quote unquote father, and Hank Pym is his quote unquote grandfather. If you follow the very messed up Pym family tree. We later learned that Immortus, who is a future version of Kang the Conqueror, because time travel, because comics people, he split Hammond into two entities in an effort to prevent Wanda from having children, because he could see that it was going to turn out badly. He should have bought a lottery ticket with that kind of foresight. So, in 1970, Wanda rejoins the Avengers and soon becomes romantically involved with Vision, despite the fact that she's a chaos witch and he's not a real boy. They get married in Giant Size Avengers #4, and they later star in 2 limited series called Vision and Scarlet Witch, in which they move to Leonia, New Jersey, which is not all that far from me and Doc. I read the comics. I've been to Leonia several times. Doesn't look anything like what they drew. They draw it as this like idyllic suburban little hamlet. And there are parts of Leonia that are very nice, but Leonia is not that far from New York City and is very much, listen, it's Bergen County. And if you know anything about Bergen County, New Jersey, Bergen County is 15 pounds in a 5-pound bag.
Yeah, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as like this, semi-rural suburbanite kind of area that gets portrayed. That's the bottom line.
No, like you have to go like real far north Bergen County. And there's parts that are like Sussex. And I know I'm doing like inside talk that nobody outside of New Jersey is going to understand. There are parts of Bergen that are very rural and idyllic, but Leonia ain't one of them. And it don't look like the way they drew it in the Vision and Scarlet Witch series. So that New Jersey stuff notwithstanding, Wanda uses her hex powers. This is in the second series. In the first series, we find out that Magneto is her father, which again, at the time stood canonically for 30-something years. In the second series, she uses her hex powers to get pregnant and give birth to twins, William and Thomas. Because Vision can't actually get her pregnant because he's not a real boy. So they have these children. Then Vision gets dismantled. And when he's rebuilt, he no longer has Simon's brainwaves because Simon Williams said, I didn't consent to having my brain patterns put in the Vision the first time. And it was like a piece of my soul was ripped out and taken away from me. So I don't want Vision. I want Vision rebuilt, but I don't want him to think like me. So instead, Vision now becomes this colorless, emotionless android. So he's still good. He just doesn't care about people. And this obviously puts a strain on their marriage. Then we come to find out that William and Thomas are actually fragments of Mephisto's soul and are reabsorbed back into Mephisto. And this drives Wanda mad. And not only that, she forgets that she ever had children as part of this whole thing. She forgets that she had children, but most of her friends still remember. And so this is now stuck in her brain. And over time, she begins to remember the children and say, why aren't they here? Why aren't they with me? And this leads to Avengers Disassembled. Brian Michael Bendis, David Finch. This is a book where it's appropriate that David Finch is on it because nobody smiles. Everybody has gritted teeth. Everybody is angry or looks like they're really constipated. And that fits David Finch's style. Because David Finch draws comics in a world in which no one is ever happy. So Wanda uses chaos magic to create distractions and attack the Avengers, break them down. She makes Tony think he's drunk and give a speech before the UN where he blasts Latveria. She takes control of Vision's body and uses it to basically do a suicide attack on Avengers Mansion. And then his body launches Ultron drones. She gets Jen Walter She-Hulk to go berserk and rip Vision in half. This leads to the Avengers really sort of factioning amongst themselves because they were hit and they didn't know what was happening. And then Wanda's insanity leads to House of M, where Quicksilver realizes she's losing it. We need to help her before her reality bending powers go completely haywire. whole bunch of heroes want to kill her because they say that's the only way we're going to be able to stop her. So Pietro convinces her to create a world in which everybody gets what they want. Everybody's deepest desires are met. So she creates this brand new world where Magneto and the House of Magnus rule the world. Peter Parker's famous and he's married to Gwen Stacy. There's like all this stuff going on and nobody remembers how the world was except for Wolverine and this little girl, Layla Miller. And I'm not going to get into the whole thing. So the heroes fight back. Hawkeye is brought back to life. He starts attacking Wanda because he's like, I'm dead in the real world and you're partly responsible for that, but I'm alive here and you're messing everything up. I'm going to attack you. So as the heroes fight back, Wanda finally snaps and says the 3 words that have impacted Marvel Comics for 20 years at this point: no more mutants. So now the world returns to normal, but the overwhelming majority of mutants have lost their powers, leaving only a few hundred with abilities. And then that leads into decimation and a whole host of other events. Now Wanda is like off and she's recovering. She's completely snapped. She ends up engaged to Dr. Doom. It's a whole thing. So meanwhile, there's a team of Young Avengers. And you have 2 such characters, Wiccan and Speed. Wiccan is Billy. And he's basically got magical abilities, reality warping, telepathy, mental control. These powers sound familiar? And then there's Tommy, who's known as Speed. Fun fact, Tommy was born in Springfield, New Jersey.
That is so hilarious.
Which is where I live. And everybody goes, gosh, you guys look like you could be twins. William, Billy, and Tommy were also the names of Wanda's children. So they come to believe that they are the reincarnations of William and Thomas, Wanda's formerly lost children. And so they seek out Wanda, hoping to undo her insanity. And that maybe if she sees that we're here, she can put the world back the way it was. So she proceeds to meet them. She, in fact, embraces them as her children. I don't know whether they are or not, but she's happy. They're happy. Meanwhile, Vision gets reassembled by Tony Stark. He does forgive She-Hulk for ripping him apart, but he does not forgive Wanda. In Avengers vs. X-Men 0, Wanda shows up at the Avengers Mansion with Carol Danvers and Jessica Drew. And they're like, hey, you've been down for a while. You've been really upset. Come to the mansion with us. You'll be with friends. She shows up. Vision shows up and goes, hold up. You're not welcome here. I'm not going to fight you, but you used me to attack our friends, and I cannot stand by and just wash that under the, I can't sweep that under the rug. You can't come back here anymore. And they turn away, and as was famously stated on the cover of one of the famous Avengers mags, even an android can cry. And it does bring the Vision to tears. Wanda's, of course, a hysterical mess. But they don't reconcile. They don't get back together. And as far as I could tell, that's the last real interaction that they've had. Wanda's gone off and she had a solo series a couple of years ago. Vision obviously had the very acclaimed series written by Tom King that Doc and I both have fallen in love with. Is a fantastic piece of storytelling. But the Wanda and Vision relationship in the comics is non-existent. And I know that was a very lengthy backstory. I've been rambling on for close to 15 minutes at this point, just on the background. But I had to tell you all of that because in order for us to really dive into the issues, you have to understand where their relationship was and where it is now. And that the WandaVision relationship that you see in the MCU and that is going to be depicted in the Disney Plus series is very, very different than how it is in the comics. In the movies and in the TV show, Wanda and Vision were on the team. They met, they fell in love, they're still in love. And then Vision died when he had his head ripped open by Thanos. And so I do believe that they're going the sort of House of M route with the show where Wanda's going to use her heretofore unseen reality warping abilities to make a whole city and make a whole world, and Vision is back and they have kids and everything is hunky-dory like it is on TV. That's the conceit of the show. So that's the basis for where they're going with that. And I get why they're going that route to do their version of House of M and the history of the relationship. But the live action versions of Wanda and Vision are rooted in a much more loving and happy relationship than at least presently exists in the comics. And so with all of that, I'm going to stop talking for a moment. I'm going to let Doc say a couple words before we get into the issues.
So my mind is a little blown only because I can't remember the last time Anthony had this type of opening where I didn't feel comfortable interjecting, because I felt that any interruption would have thrown this so off course that he would have run the risk of needing to restart. And I really did not want that. So
nobody wanted that.
I just want to say that this is one of those situations where I'm actually incredibly grateful for his introductions, because this one would have left me a little lost. I knew the basics of their previous relationship and the current situation. I'll be honest that I did not dive that much into the kids, so I definitely learned something from this. And I will gladly incorporate that into any further discussion for the rest of this episode. But I think this just goes towards the idea that there's no such thing as a totally perfect and happy relationship for anyone. And it's a lot better to just get it all out there and see how we could deal with it, as opposed to just going through the motions. But I'll leave that for the specific issues. Wanda, for me, is always going to be a mutant, and that's just this weird thing that I've had in my head. So anything else that's been discussed really throws me off. I don't consider it any other way. So I don't know if that's going to impact anything. It probably shouldn't. But that just tells you exactly how viscerally upset I might have been when Marvel took this route as to how to classify her and Quicksilver. So I'll get off that soapbox. I won't even get it. I won't get on that soapbox, let me say.
Yeah, it was very much done to be the middle finger to 20th Century Fox. Like, oh, we're just not going to make the mutants anymore because we control the IP. Ha ha ha.
So, yeah.
So, getting into the issues then, Wanda individually has always struggled with her identity because, in addition to the whole mutant, not mutant parentage situation, she started off as a villain. She was reformed, but there was always that question of, you did some really bad things before. I don't know if we can fully trust you. And then House of M and everything. And I know that recently in the House of X, Powers of 10, Krakoa and the whole mutant state there have declared her basically public enemy number 2 behind Bolivar Trask because of the number of mutants that she killed and the fact that she is not a mutant, but was, claiming to be one of them and her whole situation. So that whole searching for a connection and trying to find a group to belong to and always wondering, will they accept me for who am I? And can I find people that will accept me for me? I think that's something that we all as human beings have experienced at some point or another. But for periods of time, Wanda has it for long periods of time. And that can really impact a person's psyche. So Doc, I'll let you take over from here.
So even as young infants, we have to learn the idea of object permanence. That just because something is not immediately there in your line of sight, your vision, that it doesn't blink out of existence. It doesn't go away. Wanda's in a unique situation, both because of powers and because of her own experiences, that even as an adult, that may not necessarily take as well as you would think. That's one of the most basic human and honest biological capabilities that we have. And yet, when you think about the idea that you have parents, even if you were adopted, they exist. It's not a matter of saying you had a relationship with them. You just know that they were out there at some point, whether they're alive, dead, good relationship, bad relationship, whatever. Wanda has had that story rewritten. And I don't mean that from the outside. Like, I'm not talking about authors or anything like that. I'm saying that if you take this the way it's presented, she really has had her own life narrative change. And therefore, she has to process what most of us have to do in childhood and process it again as an adult on more than one occasion. And to not only do that for your own existence with who your parents are, where you're from, what their histories are, and how you came to be, and then to have to do that with your own children, or not your children, or your surrogates, or your adoptive children, to go through just about every permutation of what a family structure is supposed to look like, and to know that part of it is under your control, but the part that's under your control seems to change every once in a while. First, it's, well, even if I thought I had this parent, but now I learned it's someone else. Oh, but they're in a position, forget the mutant part with it being Magneto, as humans. Okay, they're in a position of power. They are part of a business, or they have a lot of money, or they are famous, whatever it is. That's something now that is a strength that I didn't realize I had. And maybe that'll be to my advantage. Except now that person is no longer considered someone in your life. Oh, then wait, they're not really my parents? It gets to be confusing because you don't have a foundation. You don't have much of what we would want to develop our solid structures for how we want to go through life. It's so fitting for what she's known for, this chaos magic. So I do like the interplay, both from a literary standpoint as well as a psychological standpoint, that if so many things are left up to chance, then any amount of planning that you do has to be tenuous at best. And unfortunately, even if you were to have like this perfect dynamic of knowing what to do and when and how to handle all of these changes all the time with who you're interacting with and who's considered to be, your bloodline and who is supposed to be an authority figure and all this stuff, even if you have that in place, there's no rule that says your emotions have to follow along that same trajectory. And as we've seen with Wanda, it clearly does not. I have a guess that even if instead of being a roller coaster ride of events, the ups and downs that Wanda goes through, let's say it's a smooth ascent. Let's say everything just keeps getting better and better. My point is, because these are jumps, these are leaps in what happens in terms of the information that she has. Even if in theory things were getting better each time, the emotional turmoil that she suffers would still be there, because we as a species are not meant to have those kind of leaps in short periods of time and time again. That's not what we're designed for. Even when it's for the better, we don't accommodate that nearly as well as we could. So I'm not blaming Wanda for quote unquote going crazy. But I'm not exactly sure any of us would have done any better.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I don't want to make it seem like her descent into madness was unwarranted or out of left field. I do think that to some extent they may have taken it and gone too far potentially with it, just to say, oh, we're just going to break down Wanda and make her just completely lose it. But it is rooted in, as you said, you know, some very real world ideas, and the idea that any one of us could fall victim to these sorts of things is not so far-fetched, you know. And I do think that the best stories as far as descents into madness are those where it's rooted in some realistic portrayal. So I think that that's perhaps one of the reasons why the story has been as iconic as it has been, because you could say, okay, she lost her husband, she lost her children, this, that, and the other. You know, even for comics, it's messed up, but that it is rooted in some base understanding of real human nature, even if she is mutant or inhuman or whatever the hell they want to say she is canonically at this particular moment. So Vision, let's talk about him individually now. Vision has always been questioning the validity of his emotions, whether he can truly feel connected to anyone, whether he can really think. He gets some security with Wanda and in their marriage. And to his credit, he's like, I don't question that I love you and I don't question that I feel for you. But he still does question some of these other things, and the whole notion of being detached from humanity because he is supposed to look like a person, he is supposed to think like a person, but he is not actually a human being, is always going to leave him close, but not quite. And it's in that emotional uncanny valley that he gets stuck, and it really does a number on him. So I will let you, I see you nodding.
You stole my line. I was going to say emotional uncanny valley. I can't believe you did that. No, that's amazing. I greatly respect the fact then that you nailed it perfectly what the issue is. Close but no cigar. The idea that perception does not quite match the reality. And it's not anyone's fault, similar to Wanda. The question is, how do we relate this then to our own humanity? Because the idea is we all are human. We don't quite have cyborgs, androids, synthoids, whatever. We don't have that yet. Who knows if we ever will. But the idea that you can be in a circumstance with another group of people, notice the emotional level, either through the intensity or the description, and not match what other people are going through, even though everyone else around you seems to be having it. That is something that a lot of people can relate to. I'm going to give just a real basic example. You've been in a movie theater or a live show, something like that. And on screen or in person, someone says something and you just hear everybody just laughing hysterically. And you're just sitting there going, I understand the context, and I synthesized it the way everyone else did, where I understand the point, and I guess I understand the juxtaposition of their statement that would make that funny, but I'm not laughing hysterically. And on one hand, it can be revealing because you know now that for some reason your processing of a circumstance is different than what you can see around you. That doesn't have to be a bad thing, but because there's an intense emotion connected to that circumstance, now it can go from puzzlement to totally shifting your opinion of the others around you. Well, is this guy really that funny? Well, I mean, I came to the show, so clearly he's funny, and I thought the other jokes were funny. Why did that one not get me? Well, wait. Am I stupid? Did I just miss it? Like, what, am I just not thinking the way I usually do? All these questions start coming up, or they can. Not everybody does this, and honestly, don't take that much effort if you don't do this, please. But that's the closest I can get to describing that potential disconnect that happens to all of us. And that's just one example. For yourself, I'm sure you could think of plenty. And when I say yourself, I'm not talking Anthony, I'm talking everybody listening. When that happens, it can be very minor and you just move on. But what happens when it's much more serious events? What happens if it's a situation where something tragic happens and you don't think it's as sad an event as everyone else? What happens if it's a joyous occasion and for some reason you feel a sense of melancholy? What does that say about you? It doesn't have to say anything major, but it could. It might. So now you have some introspection to do. And if that's the case, how do you go about that? Who do you talk to? Do you talk to the people around you that don't share your opinion? Do you talk to a confidant? Do you scour the internet to try and find the one other person or small group of people that agree with your dissonance? I don't know. I'm not saying that any of these things are right or wrong. But going through that process and having someone who's with you throughout that process, your significant other that's right there at that same show, or going through that major event, and maybe they share your view, maybe they don't. Either way, there's going to be an opportunity for something to perhaps adapt. And I can't imagine throwing in the idea that you're doing this and you're not quote unquote human. You throw that in, I'm not exactly sure what extra dimension that that throws into the mix. I'm just doing this from the typical human standpoint. That's what makes Vision amazing.
Vision, I've always been a fan of the character. He's kind of always been, I think he's like underrated, and he's one of those guys that you always forget about. He's like Martian Manhunter, on the DC side. Martian Manhunter is a guy that the Justice League always forgets about. Here's a guy who power-wise is on par with Superman and any of the heavy hitters, but everybody always forgets about John. Same thing with Vision. Everybody focuses on Steve and Tony and Thor and Hulk and stuff. Vision can jack you up like 17 different ways. And they always have to find some story-breaking ability to neuter him or make him not powerful. And some of them are obvious, and some of them are like, okay, they're just doing this because they needed Vision out of the way. But he's one of those guys that, if used properly in a story, can really make some classic tales. And there's a whole, obviously, host of history there with his stories, Vision Quest, and just some of those really, really fantastic Avengers stories. But it's that notion of, like you were saying, and we were talking about the emotional uncanny valley, and that whole notion of wanting to come close and searching for more and trying to find that connection. And and looking for that, that I think is what has helped make him such a compelling character, because we can all identify with that idea of longing for connection and thinking, well, maybe if we just do this, we'll be accepted. Maybe if we just try this, we'll fit in, etc. That's a very human feeling, a very human emotion. And it's when those stories are rooted in those very human emotions that you get a really compelling and iconic story. So now the marriage. Now we talked about Wanda individually. We talked about Vision individually. Their marriage, as unusual a pairing as it is, the Wanda and Vision marriage is constantly under threat, not just from the external forces and the fact that they are both Avengers, Reserve Avengers, whatever West Coast Avengers, whatever version of the team they happen to be on at the time, but their own unique pairing and the fact that they are constantly struggling against their own inherent natures, and the fact that they are both struggling with their own stuff and coming together. And much like we were just talking about Vision and how he's close but no cigar, Wanda and Vision emotionally connect, but not quite, because of the host of incompatibilities that they have together. Again, him being a synthezoid and she's a human, and all this other stuff, and the fact that they can't conceive children naturally. These are all things that are just baked into their relationship that they cannot solve, not without breaking all of reality. And so from a couple standpoint, and we've never done a couple like this. We did the Xavier Magneto, but we've never done a couple in an episode where these fundamental differences ultimately lead to the dissolution of the relationship. And I know you're not a couples counselor, but you've been married for quite some time. And I feel like, you know, between your training as a professional and your experience as a married man, you have some insight on, shall we say, conflict resolution.
Yes, have a police negotiator on speed dial. No, seriously, please, people, that was a joke. It really was a joke. This comes down to the idea that opposites attract. That does happen sometimes. I don't even say opposites. This is just random items attract. There's this is just such a mix of random amalgamated emotional pieces that come together. And in all honesty, to bring it back once again to the human aspect of it, the idea that there's a relationship there where maybe not many people, but at least one or two people from the outside looking in would say, I don't think this is going to work out. And in addition to that, you may have another one or two or many people that actually say, no, I think this is going to be harmful to you two and we don't want it. And then everybody else that either is indifferent to it or at least says, hey, the heart wants what the heart wants. These two are together. Let's support it. Let's make it work. Hopefully everyone comes to that conclusion, because I think every relationship deserves that basic understanding. I think that's a great mindset to put things in. Having said that, there are so many things that come together when people point out, and I'm going to make a reference to something that I never thought I'd make a reference to, but the Broadway show Rent pointing out, I've got baggage and I'm going to be taking this with me no matter what. And if you don't at least accept the idea that the baggage is there, then everything's doomed from the start. So I don't want to make this sound like this is a Wanda and Vision thing. I want to make this sound like this is an every relationship ever known to the history of humankind thing. Because it's the truth. There's no such thing as a relationship that doesn't have its own quirks and foibles that are going to inherently remain in the relationship ad infinitum. And there are many things that, if those quirks aren't at least acknowledged, are going to continue to cause fights. They don't have to be fights. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes the things that on the outside may look like they would cause fights are actually the things that the couple adore about one another. Unfortunately, though, the couple themselves are just as easily able to point out the things that, while everybody else just kind of hand waves and says, oh, that's cute, is driving the other person to want to put an ice pick through their head. I'm exaggerating a little bit. Anybody that's been in a married relationship knows what I'm talking about here. I am not making any threats in any way. And no, my life has not been threatened either, officially. No, this whole situation where you have a person that points out, I kind of had a messed up childhood, meeting someone who says, well, I have never really dealt with my emotions well. You could see where this might lead to some problems. It really doesn't take that much. And before we started recording, Anthony and I kind of talked about this, where he pointed out, this seems too simplistic. My point was, well, because it has to be. It's not necessarily that the topic doesn't have to be complicated, but that also doesn't mean it's easy. And there's just so many possible intricate layers to this. We could talk about the idea of what's the difference between that initial romance of puppy love and then the maturity of wanting to actually integrate each other's lives, to the idea of progeny. What does it mean to want to have your legacy be lasting through your own biological family, to how do you incorporate external goals, let alone you mentioned external forces, but the idea that you're going to have other demands. How does your work life impact your individual relationship? How does having kids in addition to a work life impact that? Or the idea of giving up a career for the sake of staying at home, or going back to the workforce after a change. And then, of course, I'm going to end on this note, the idea that despite all of this, or because of all of this, the relationship itself changes to one of dissolution, that is going to end at some point. Whether or not that's a divorce, whether or not that's separation, whether or not that's one person dying before the other. Things are going to change at some point, and the change is going to be drastic. Sometimes things come back together. Sometimes they don't. But all of those factors that we were just talking about, they all exist simultaneously. And it could be a little difficult if we get too heady to think about those all at the same time. So when you add the idea of superpowers or chaos magic, or the fact that you were built in the first place, that even if your father was destroyed, you knew you had to rebuild him. Not talking about the Ultron factor. All of that might impact things a little bit. And then the manipulation, because now forget Wanda just literally using Vision, but the idea that any one member in a two-person relationship may try and tug on the heartstrings of the other, or blackmail them, or use money as a power tool, or so many different things that can happen. Withholding romance, withholding sex, all sorts of different tools that come into play in possible changes and adaptations. I'm going to be more optimistic rather than making it sound all doom and gloom, because that's not the point. I think that all of it, even if you haven't had any of those variations happen to you, if you're in this type of relationship, and by this type of relationship, I mean committed relationship, even if you're not married, all of it, in my opinion, is worth it. I'm saying that because I have a feeling that there are some people out there that might need to hear that around this time of year. The holidays are usually what we consider to be very joyous, but for some people out there, they may be the opposite. And in the case of Wanda and Vision, I know in the TV show, we are probably going to get some variation where things for the most part, are kind of working out and they're going to do what they do. And in the comics, it didn't. But either way, it was worth it.
Doc issues, telling everybody, put yourself out there. Love. There's that Optimus underneath the cynic, after all. Long time happily married man. We're going to take a short break. When we get back, we'll get into treatment. Stay tuned.
Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Maddie.
Do you like horror movies?
I sure do.
Well, did you know that most horror movies are inspired by real-life horror?
Really? Like what?
Well, take The Shining, for instance. That's based on Stephen King's real-life addictions, or The Purge, which could be our country any minute now.
Oh, and The Strangers, which is based on a real-life murder. People should be talking about these things.
Hey, guys.
Oh, hey, Producer Michael.
Hi.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but somebody already is. It's you.
That's right. We are Friday the 13th, the podcast where we talk about horror in real life and horror in media, all from an LGBTQ perspective.
Because we gay, y'all.
We are proud members of the Legion Podcast Network, and we can be found on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or wherever your favorite podcasts are found.
And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Come along with us on this crazy journey, and as always,
Get slayed.
Hey everybody, this is Dino,
And Michelle.
and we're bringing you our podcast.
Huh?
Podcast.
Okay.
What do we do with our podcast?
Think a little bit of everything.
We got faith, family, horror movies,
TV, kids.
social media ridiculousness. We've got the most important message,
Be decent to each other.
all wrapped up in a little hour-long or so chunk. You can reach us at gangalley.com, like a gang.
In an alley.
You can reach us on all your favorite pod chasers. We've got a Facebook group, a Twitter feed, and
Yeah, that's us.
that's us, our podcast. All right, guys. Have a good one. Peace.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Whitley, and you're listening to Capes on the Couch.
And we're back. So, treatment in universe. Now, given the dissolution of the relationship, I imagine that your focus would be on them as individuals rather than as a couple.
Yeah. So it depends on them, but I'm going to go with the premise that they really are broken up and therefore they're each seeking something. My technique for Wanda is going to sound very basic because it is. And yet, it may be the most dangerous technique that I've ever recommended for in-universe treatment. Wanda and I are going to do some journaling. Now, why is that a problem? When you take a person that has demonstrated severe emotional instability due to multiple personal traumas, and you want them to have some way of processing it by writing it down. And by the way, the main concern that everyone has is that they're utilizing these very misunderstood powers, but still reality-altering powers. I'm basically asking her to potentially recreate the Necronomicon here. This is very dicey, and yet I think the way that her brain processes things is much different, as with most of us, when we write something down versus when we just, quote unquote, think it in our heads. And I want to see that process. It allows for us to synthesize it a bit better. So I would be willing to take that chance. And if it didn't work, I wouldn't know it because reality would have changed anyway. And hey, I would just have to go along with it. Vision? Oh, man. Vision is a bit different. I wouldn't do the journaling piece. I think I would have to find a way to just create a structure he would understand. And I'd almost ask, once again, risking the worst possibilities, I would ask him to design himself. What is it that he wants to be? Because often what he's trying to do is he's trying to solve problems for everyone else, And he ends up getting used that way. And we've had several episodes where we've mentioned characters being in those situations. But I want him to be a little selfish if he's capable of such a thing. What would he want to, quote unquote, look like? What would he want to have as his preferences? What does he dislike about those around him? Not just being mad that something bad happened. There's a difference there. There's a difference between having an emotional reaction because there was a negative consequence and actually saying that I just don't have a preference for certain things. It's very subtle, but I think that's once again part of that emotional uncanny valley, and I try and bridge that. And unfortunately, with the way Vision works, I think he would have to try and construct that for himself, which I just realized creates another Ultron, and we're back to square one. But once again, if that happens, then maybe this time he'll get it right. That's why pencils have erasers, right?
Optimistic, and certainly one can only hope. Can we even do an out of universe for this? Given all of the things that have happened and the fact that I spent 15 minutes describing how so messed up these characters' individual backstories are, I cannot wrap my brain around a version of these characters that is in any way, shape, or form rooted in reality.
And I, just for the sake of people that can't see what we're doing because we're not actually live streaming this, I just did the classic I dream of Genie head nod because your wish is my command. This isn't about all of those details. This is about the idea that you have a chaotic background in terms of history, along with a person that is emotionally stunted. And they're now in a relationship together and don't know how to make it work. That's something that actually is pretty darn common. So from that standpoint, out of universe treatment involves, as has been hinted at, the idea that each person has to want to adapt something about themselves in addition to any adaptations that happen together. There is no guarantee that this is a perfect balance. I am not saying that both people need therapy and they both need couples counseling. I'm not saying that at all. This could be the entire spectrum. Maybe it's one person that specifically needs therapy. Maybe it's both. Maybe nobody needs specific therapy, but they both need a construct that they're willing to work on with each other that maybe they could just do by talking and having a regular time period of having dinners out together. Whatever it is, I'm really broadening the scope here because what often happens in my experience clinically is that we look at all of the major events like, oh, this person, once again, not trying to be pejorative, but this is what people say. This person went crazy. Oh my goodness. They need to really get that fixed so that this marriage can work. Like that's one way of looking at it. But maybe, just maybe, it doesn't have to be that drastic. And making sure that both sides are in agreement as to what that balance is on the seesaw. I don't care if it's 90-10. I don't care if it's 50-50. Whatever it is, come to an agreement on what the balance is and guarantee, this is the one thing I'll say, guarantee that it's not 100-0. That's the one guarantee. Because the second it becomes 100-0, then guess what? We're not having a dialogue. We're having a monologue. In which case, if that's really how both sides feel, then I think we, quote unquote, solved the problem. There needs to be a dissolution. You need to move on. But if it's not at that point, and for the most part, if we're really talking about this, it's not, then you continue to work towards something better. If, on the other hand, you have come to that agreement with dissolution, because that's also true, then everyone's heard the term amicable divorce. Is that truly possible? I think it is. Is that something possible in the moment when many of these intense decisions are being made? I don't think so. But having someone outside of the relationship at least be an ear bent and potentially a guide could be helpful. This is not something that I take lightly. I am not a couples counselor. I am not pretending to be. But the idea that even when I'm doing an individual session with someone doesn't involve their other person, their partner, that would be a falsehood. You have made an agreement. I'm not even talking about official stuff. I'm not talking about marriage or anything. You have made this agreement that this other person has a certain level of connection and value to you, that you are willing to continue altering parts of your own reality to make things work. When that changes, you change too, for better or for worse. Just be aware of whether or not it's for better or for worse.
Interesting. Okay. You took that in a very different direction than I had initially anticipated, but not in a bad way. I'm not complaining at all. Just, again, I had said, I don't think you could make this real, but because you're that damn good, you did. So that's a credit to you. And I know you're laughing and smirking at me, and I don't care.
No, it's not that. It's because I feel like at this point I need to say that I am the game.
Listen, between the two of us, I've got the bigger nose. So if anybody's going to be Triple H, it's going to be me. So I know a lot of these times we have a skit. We don't have a skit for you this week, largely because Doc and I talked about it and we said there's no real way to reconcile them. They're done. Their relationship is over. Their marriage is done. And any attempt at trying to create a scenario where we would get them together, it was going to come across a little too ham-fisted. And we said, you know what? We're not going to do it just to do it. So let's just focus instead on giving more context to the discussion. And also the fact that it took me 15 minutes just to go through the backstory, that ate up a lot of time. And we didn't want to drag this on just so we could say, oh, haha, we're going to create a skit where, oh, let's see if we can get them back together and show them that they really love each other. No, they're separated, and we're going to respect that. So no skit this week. If you were looking for one, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, just because I know more than likely someone's going to point this out. Well, Doc and Anthony, why don't you create a skit where it's clear that they're going to continue to be separated? And in that case, I'll tell my opinion. And once again, this is my clinical opinion. This is not something that has to be taken as gospel. And I know for a fact that other people feel differently. When it comes to relationship interventions, you need buy-in from both parties. And right now, at least the way it's presented, Vision does not have interest in that. So to even have the premise of having a skit where they're doing that, I would have to impose that on the character to say, oh yeah, it's clear he wanted to try and work this out, but then it didn't, it's getting messed up. I can't even make that initial leap. Now, there are other people that think that actually it can work that way. You can make that leap with someone even when they at the time haven't considered it. But in my opinion, that has a low success rate. I'm glad to have that discussion offline at any point if I ever actually use social media, which I really don't. But the point still stands. I'm willing to have that discussion because I know there are differing opinions on that. I'm just saying, clinically, when I've had patients want to do that and just want to say, hey, if you just call them, they'll do this and whatnot. And I've even once in a while, I'll have this moment for myself saying, okay, let's give it a try. And it falls flat. And it's not, I don't just mean fall flat as in it didn't work, as in it may have done more harm than good. So maybe that's why I'm a little jaded about that technique. Unfortunately, I can't change my experience with it. But at the same time, once again, maybe to my own naivete, I'm still open to the idea, but it's not going to be me then that's practicing it. So that's another reason why we don't have a skit, because the one way that I would have felt comfortable doing it just didn't really have it in there.
Same. Maybe not in quite so many words. Maybe not in exactly that way, but I didn't want to write a skit and put my heart into performing something if it wasn't going to be true to the characters and be something that was entertaining or with a good lesson learned. If it was just going to be the two of them sniping at each other, I didn't really think that was worth the entertainment value and time. So apologies to all if you were expecting something fun. But I will say, as we move towards the ending, go and read the 2 Vision and Scarlet Witch miniseries. I think they were very well done, despite their erroneous portrayals of Leonia, New Jersey. And, give them a read. The first one, the first issue of the old one, the first issue of the first series, which is a 4-issue limited series. They're battling trick-or-treaters who have had their souls taken over by Samhain. I never remember.
Yeah, Samhain.
Samhain. And so they're battling these poor literal children that have had their souls taken over by this demonic evil, all because of a book. So it's really good stuff. And like I said, the whole Magneto thing is done really well. In hindsight, knowing what I know years later, obviously reading the build up to the reveal, you're kind of like, okay, they're really going out of their way to hide that it's Magneto so that the reveal lands with more emphasis. But back in 1984 or whenever it was written, this was like, oh my God, Magneto is her father. So it's good quality stuff. Review read from DC23. Fantastic show. If you're a fan of superheroes and also fascinated by the human mind, then you'll love this show. Both of the hosts are a delight, and I'm so glad I found this podcast. And we are very glad you found this podcast. And as we always say, if you leave us a rating and review on iTunes or Apple Podcast or Podchaser or wherever, and you send us a screen cap, email us at capesonthecouch@gmail.com with that information and your address, and we will send you a sticker as a way of saying thank you for your rating and review, because that's how people find the show, and that's how we grow and grow. So next episode's coming up. We've got Clones, as suggested by Matt, Catwoman, as suggested by Ariel, and Levana Blackburn, as suggested by Ruby. And I'm really looking forward to that one, because that one is based on a series of novels. Not really comics, but they're sort of comic/fantasy based characters. So it's going to make for an interesting read. I haven't cracked the book yet. I have to get on that before the episode drops, but I've got a couple weeks. And as always, you can find us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Capes on the Couch. Our website is now capesonthecouch.com. And you can go there and check our back catalog and all the additional features. Still in the process of putting some things together. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, it'll be like done. And then it's just about getting the episodes up and running. As I said, I liken it to a house that you move into and it smells like paint. There's still a little bit of drywall exposed, but we're working on it. We're getting it there. And you can email us with any questions at capesonthecouch@gmail.com. And thank you for listening, and go check out WandaVision, coming out later this week on Disney Plus. They're not paying me to say that, I swear. There'd be a lot more production on this show if they were. But Doc, anything you want to add?
Just be careful in relationships that you don't let your vision Wanda too much.
Boo! Boo this man. Boo, boo, boo. I wave my fingers and I hex that away.
Look, man, if you
No
don't
more
keep,
puns.
Seriously, if you don't keep your focus, then you're just going to end up seeing Scarlet Red.
No more puns. Those are my 3 words to end this show. No more puns. For Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.